Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Streaming Alchemy Show. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to cover a topic that is kind of interesting different ways you can use PowerPoint in video productions beyond slides. So, we've all seen tons of slides, so this isn't going to be going into anything around that. This is really about different ways, different use cases for PowerPoint that sort of break the barrier of the slides only view of that as an application. But before we get there, uh, first I welcome everybody's comments and participation. You guys make the show, so any questions or comments you want to make, please feel free. We'd love to have you participate. The other piece is that we will be taking live video callers for this show as well. So if you'd like to join us on air with a question or a comment, just connect to the link below. I believe it's also a link right at the top of the show notes below this video. So we'd love to have you join us either way if you have the inclination. So let's get started with a few sort of baseline things around PowerPoint. The first thing is that PowerPoint as a general tool is really a way to layer and composite different graphical and textual elements. So images, shapes, text with different types of fills and colors can all be laid out on a screen in a certain stacking order and in a certain, sort of topological layout on the screen. The great thing about PowerPoint from a layout point of view is that it really is designed in almost all modern use cases. Hi, Brad. Great to have you here joining us. One of the things that PowerPoint gives you is a 16 by 9 workspace, which really lines up very nicely with a standard video output space. The other thing that PowerPoint provides that's really interesting here is the ability to animate those elements that it layers out. So it isn't just a static tool. You've seen a lot of static presentations, but things on a PowerPoint slide can be dynamic as well. And that's one of the things we're going to leverage here. The other thing, which is the thing that makes this all work, is that you have the ability to set the background of a PowerPoint slide to your favorite Chroma Key green or Chroma Key blue color, which means that when you have these elements you place on the screen, you can also key out that background color and create an overlay on your video production to integrate these elements into it as a downstream key. And that's something you should be able to do in OBS or TriCaster or Wirecast or vMix. So lots of different tools out there that can work with the approaches we'll be talking about today. So to get started, what I want to show is three use cases. The first one is going to be something which will slide out from the side of the screen. So if I wanted to bring in slides from the side that would show the subjects I want to cover in a show, I'm going to do that first with PowerPoint and show you how you could set that up. The second use case we're going to cover is different ways to use this for lower thirds. Uh, and the last use case will be ways to integrate graphics with some interesting elements to it. Simon, great to have you join us. Thank you. Uh, this is gonna be pretty straightforward from the visual side. But when I jump into the PowerPoint slide and sort of go through how I set it up, please feel free to ask questions or anything because I know it may be hard to see all the details on the screen. So let me start first by showing you what would basically be something you do for uh, a slide out for a show, which lists the itinerary for the show. So in this case, I'm bringing in a topic of the day, and then I'm calling in each one of the elements that will be covered under this topic. And one of the things you'll notice as I move between this first segment, which is side panels, uh, when I go to the second uh, segment that we'll be talking about, the first one dims. So what I've created here is a way to add elements dynamically off the side of a screen, but also to control the focus of those elements to something that is highlighted or basically dimming the other elements. So as I do this and I sort of move down the screen, these are all the subjects that we're going to be covering here. And then when I'm finished, they can just disappear off the screen. So let me switch into the interface here, and I will give you a sense of how we do some of this. So let me get this set up here. So pull this out on the side, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. So let me see if I can set this zoom to try 90. This should work. See if we fit. Good. So now everything fits on the screen. So all I did for this exercise was I created each one of these elements as basically a rectangle with text in it and a gradient in the background. I positioned them off the side of the slide here, and then I used animation to bring them on screen one at a time. And if you look here on the side, this is something that in PowerPoint, there's a segment here, I'll switch over to it, called animations. If you see this right up on the top. And what I am doing now is I am showing you all the animations that I applied to these elements. So the first animation right here is the animation that slides the top rectangle in. And you'll see that the effect option we're using for this animation is something that will have the element move on a linear path. So here we set this up so that it moves to the left. So it goes from the right of the screen onto the left. And this is very straightforward. Jeremy, great to have you join us. Thank you. So with the element now moving over, I can then take every sequential element and basically do the same thing. Have each one of these elements use the same right to left effect to position itself. But the way I'm doing that is I'm doing it only on a click. So one of the tricks you have in PowerPoint with all of the animation is that you can tell it to not take an action until some other trigger, like a click or the previous action is finished, things of that sort. So these are all different ways that you can bring an element on screen in PowerPoint. And because we have the green now, you're just bringing on the element in isolation with the video chroma keyed into the rest of the image. So for each of these now, when I bring them in, though I'm doing the same thing, after that first segment, which is just bring the rectangle in, when I click to bring in this second segment, what I'm doing is one additional thing. This brings this new rectangle in, but this here does what's called an emphasis effect. So if I look at all the different options I have with effects options, let me just see if I can pull this down here. There are a lot of different ways that I can bring elements on in PowerPoint, but they're not just for movement. So some of these things are called emphasis effects. And if I look at the emphasis effects, I have ways to darken or lighten or flash or do all different types of things to draw attention to specific elements. So in doing this now, what I've done is I've used the darken element on the rectangle that was up previously, and the new rectangle slides in fully highlighted with a nice gradient that sort of makes it pop. So we do that across the board. So each of these segments that we bring in now follows that same model. And if you set this up, you could in fact just take and copy them segment to segment to paste it all out, and it would run in order to do this type of slide outside presentation. So if, let me just sort of, let me just jump back in here and, sorry. So now again, this was exactly what we went through. So you can see it here, in action as we go through this before we jump into the next segment. So the elements are all pretty straightforward to do. And this is something that, could add, a different element of pop to presentations. The next thing that I want to get into, though, is probably the most overall useful element for people, even if you have a graphic system already in place with your production switcher. And that's something that can lets you manage the lower thirds that you display on screen. So let me show you here. Now, you see these buttons across the top of my head up here? Uh, these are control buttons that I place now on the PowerPoint slide. And when I click on these buttons, now see, it can bring on a lower third. The other thing that it's done is it's actually changed the button you're seeing on the screen now to an off button. So I have the ability to do this and bring this off. And all of these now could all be separate and can all be used dynamically during the show. So you could set up half a dozen of these if you had some type of conference you needed to work with people on, and do these things to turn the graphics on and off for the lower thirds. So very, very effective because it provides now an interactive control surface for using this type of effect. It's not just something that will happen sequentially. So let me just give you a little bit more of a view here of what you're seeing, of how this was set up and what you'd be seeing in PowerPoint. So one of the big differences here is that we're triggering actions based on an element that's already on the screen. So this button up here, you can see it says off. Let me explain why this looks the way it does right now. The first three things we do when this slide loads is we hide the off buttons. So if I come up here, and let me just see if I can select this and move this, you will see that the on button is actually sitting right below it. So when I set this up, what I'm doing is I'm creating a set of on buttons. And then on top of those, because again, in PowerPoint, we can layer things. On top of those, I have the off buttons. When I hide the off buttons, they disappear and you only see the ons. So when I click on the on button, it actually launches a set of things, which the first of which is to bring on the off button to cover the on button. So after it's triggered its effect, what we want to do now is we want to make sure that we're actually not letting you click that button again. So it puts a new button on top. It says, take that slide off. So that's the first thing you're seeing. But the way this works is what's most interesting. Because I want to, let me see if I go in here. Let's see. So because I want to be able to trigger this not in sequence, but dynamically whenever I touch that button, you can, in PowerPoint, create triggers. Now, in about 3 shows ago, we talked about automation. And triggers are a key part of automation in video production. But PowerPoint uses the same concept. You can set up an element that says, this is my trigger. So when I click on this box, this on box right up here, it'll launch everything that's in this block right here. So what you're effectively doing in PowerPoint now is you are creating little subroutines that you can start up by clicking on an element on the screen. So with that sort of as a reference, what I've done here is each one of these blocks triggers when I click on. So this is for lower third 1, lower third 2, and lower third 3. And these boxes here are the triggers when I click on the off for lower thirds 1, 2, and 3. And they do basically the same thing. They're using a different animation. So in these cases, I'm using an animation which makes things appear or makes things fade in. So that's how the lower third's fading up. And I just do the exact opposite, fading down. But this is all now driven against touching buttons and not just the sequence like we had in the first example. So let me just switch back here and shift F5. So if I go through this like we did, you now see that when the off button comes, because I moved it, if you remember, so now the off button is here. So you can see exactly what was happening with that. But there was a fourth button on the screen also that I wanted to show you. One of the things is you don't necessarily have to use a second manual trigger to turn something off. You can also use timers. So in this case, I set up a timer. So it will bring the graphic on, and after 5 seconds, it'll take that off. So it's triggering off of a timer, basically, for removing it. But I've also added another graphical element here that I think you'll find pretty interesting. So when I click on this here, what you'll notice is it comes in, the little graphic comes up, spins around, and then it fades on its own without me touching anything. So this is ideal if you have to do things sort of in the heat of the moment where I just want to put something up and then it will pull itself off automatically. Uh, the other thing that's we saw on this though was a 3D graphic. So PowerPoint has the ability to integrate 3D elements into presentations, and they become true 3D. So let me jump in here. So this element down here, if I scroll all the way to the bottom, uh, is now coming in as a 3D model. And all I've done here is, instead of having separate triggers, if you look over here, let me see if I can, sorry, getting the mouse here. Okay, so instead of having separate triggers on and off like I do in the first three examples, I actually combine the on and off into one trigger. So as soon as I press this button up here for the lower third on number 4, it starts the sequence, brings on the 3D model, tells the 3D model to do an animated action. That was the thing you saw with it spinning. And then after 5 seconds, it goes down and turns all of those elements off and fades them off the screen. So that gives us that sort of dynamic lower third with a moving element and on and off the screen, all with a single click. So definitely something really cool. And this type of lower third normally would be something that you would have to create in After Effects if you wanted to do it. There really aren't any systems that could do something with that dynamic flair to it, straight out of the box. So it can be very useful, as I said, even if you have a production system with some graphics capabilities already there. So this 3D model, though, it can be used in lots of other places. So let me start off on this next slide here. And what I'm going to show you is different ways to manipulate these graphic elements using a different feature now that's also inside of the latest version of PowerPoint, PowerPoint 2019. So let me start this slide up here. Okay, so the first thing I did, if you noticed, was I had graphical elements that were sitting on the side. So I can slide those elements onto the screen. And once they're on the screen now, I have the ability to do animated 3D moves with these objects. So if I wanted to use this where, say I was going to be talking about the TriCaster VMC1, and I was going to be talking about the two-stripe control surface for it. When I start talking about the VC1, I can actually pull that out, bring it on screen, and then have it sit here and rotate. And when this rotation is done, and I'm finished talking about it, I can just have it tuck back and bring out the control surface. And it can now do its own animation. So this is actually really powerful if not overused. I mean, it can become sort of tacky if you're just using it, for the sake of doing something glitzy. But in the right situation, this could become a very powerful way to do different types of illustrations. And I could definitely see this for people that cover more technical subjects as having something more visually compelling and informative than static images. So it can definitely be used there. But the point here is that you do this now in PowerPoint without any sort of animation training. PowerPoint has the logic for doing all of these things. So let me switch in and show you how we did this. The trick for all of these is they use a feature in PowerPoint called the Morph Transition. So what the Morph Transition lets you do is it lets you take and position elements on the screen and create a new slide, reposition, resize those elements. And with that, when you transition between those two slides using the Morph Transition, you now have this sort of dynamic movement all being rendered by PowerPoint. So it's something that most people would never think of as being sort of a presentation tool, but very, very powerful. So the move between these slides, the first slide here, I had the elements off screen. The second slide, they slid in, if you remember, they slid in from the side. The third and the fourth were both bringing out the 3D object. Now, let me just talk a moment about these 3D objects because that's also something really, really cool that's been added to, I think the last two editions of PowerPoint have this. So if you go over to Insert on PowerPoint, you see there's something called 3D models. And I can actually take and load a model, either one that I've downloaded myself, like I've done with these, or from online sources. So in PowerPoint, they actually have a whole library of 3D models. I'm not sure we'll get. So you can just sort of pick the segment of type of model you want and bring that online. So again, these things don't require you to necessarily have the artistic skills yourself. There are a lot of resources online that can let you integrate these types of elements. And when you bring this model in, it is now a full 3D model. I can rotate it, position it any way I want. So this gives you, now if I wanted to sort of talk about the back and slide it around, I could do these now all as transitions. So create a slide, which has this sit in the back, and it can turn from the front to the back of the panel, from the back of the unit. And again, let me talk about this stuff with a very, very compelling visual to go along with it. And it also zooms. So these things are not static size. So if I really wanted to jump in and look at something, I could go there and do these types of things all again with 3D models because you keep all of the elements in place with this. So let me shrink this down a little so it's so if I just sort of jump back in here, you'll see again. Let me hop into this. So as I jump back in here, you can see again, these are all the elements. That's transition, a morph transition from one slide to the second. This is, again, I adjusted this to put that element up in the back. But all of these things now are just animated elements that we have inside a presentation using just PowerPoint. So that's really our show for today. Uh, Hopefully you guys have found this useful. It definitely gives you another tool that you can sort of keep in your arsenal. And let's face it, a lot of us already have PowerPoint somewhere on some system we have. So this is probably not something you're going to have to go out and purchase. This is probably something you have sitting there. And now you have hopefully a couple of new ways to use it. I think the key in thinking of this, though, is these aren't real templates of specific things. I wanted to give you an overview of the types of tools that are available here inside of PowerPoint, and you can really apply your own creativity. Explore all the different types of animations. I just touched on a few quick ones to get you thinking about it, but there's a lot more you can do here as you start to dig into it. So hopefully you're going to find ways to use this. But definitely would love your feedback. If there are, other things or other questions you have about what we did here, if there are other topics you'd like to see us cover, if, this isn't going in the direction you want, definitely just let us know. And, hopefully, we'll be able to cover everything you're looking for. Sebastian, thank you for joining us. Hopefully, everybody that watched will get something out of this that they can apply. So for our show next week, we're going to be looking at virtual PTZ cameras, basically ways to use 4K cameras inside of your HD productions. So you don't have to run a 4K production to leverage the benefit of 4K video streams coming in. So for everybody here, thank you very much for joining us. Happy to have you here as always. And until next week, have a great one. Thank you.